Hello YouTube, Dave here again, and today I finally got my copy of Xanathar's Guide to Everything. This is a book that I was anticipating probably more so than anything else this year. From the time it was announced during the Stream of Annihilation to the point where I finally picked this up, this is the single item for 5th edition Dungeons & Dragons that I was looking the most forward to. This book has a whole slew of new player character options for each of the classes. It's got some new background information that you can use to flesh out your character's backstory, as well as just some new tools for Dungeon Masters. So, what I want to do is just sort of do a quick flip through the book. I'm not going to go into detail on all of the player character options, like the new paths for each of the classes in the book or anything like that, but we'll kind of flip through, do this sort of quickly, and sort of give my overall thoughts. The first thing is the inside cover here does show off the collector's cover as well as the standard cover, and I gotta be honest, I do not like the collector's cover or the alternate cover at all. Beholders are my favorite monster in all of Dungeons & Dragons, so I would much rather have something that has Beholder clearly presented on it than whatever this is. Now, Volo's Guide to Monsters, their alternate cover had a Mind Flare on there, which looked amazing. It's just, I never had the chance to pick that one up, but I really just, I don't like the way that that cover looks. But that's, again, on a personal level. So, inside this book, again, we've got our table of contents here. So, Chapter 1 is Character Options, which goes all the way from the different paths and archetypes for all the classes, including some new racial feats. And that is running from pages 7 in this book all the way up to about 76. There's a lot of new information in here. So again, I'm just going to kind of flip through this. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on each of the classes or their new archetypes, but here's the list here. If you just want to see like the names of everything. And the descriptions there. Alright, so the first thing I'm going to say, overall, I don't get to play Dungeons & Dragons as a player, so a lot of the stuff that's in here is not something that I'm personally going to get much or any use out of. So when I talk about this particular section, I just want sort of the caveat to it being that I'm pretty much the perpetual Dungeon Master. So my opinions on this isn't going to necessarily reflect what you would want as a player. Overall, I'm not actually too keen on a lot of the new options for the classes. For example, the Barbarian stuff, none of it really struck me as interesting, or stuff that I was like hoping to get, or options that I think were going to greatly improve my ability to play Barbarians, because again, I don't actually get to play characters, but even the Bard, like the College of Swords is interesting, but I think the College of Valor already presented a good enough option for a martial-oriented Bard that it just didn't feel like the College of Swords was necessary. Some of the options that I do really like, however, for the fighters, I love the Arcane Archer, and that's because when I get a chance to play, I like to play Archer-based characters, and Arcane Archer was always one of my favorite prestige classes that they had back in 3rd edition. So this is something that I would definitely use. For example, now other things that I'm just definitely not a big fan of is monks, for example, have the Way of the Drunken Master, and I just don't like the Drunken Master concept. To me, it's just something that I've never liked. So to have that in there, it's, if you're a player and you want to play something like that, then that's awesome. But to me, it's like, that's not something that I ever really needed in this book. Now, for Paladins, the Sacred Oaths, they do have the Oath of the Conquest, which makes for an interesting idea if you were playing an evil campaign, for example, instead of just having like the Oathbreaker Paladin. This is a Paladin that's all about, conquest and bending people to their will. Again, definitely not something that works in a flavor sense for a heroic character, but if you're playing like anti-heroes or even villains, then that's a great option. As far as the Rangers go, one of the things that I always thought would be in this book would be alternate class features for the ranger themselves. For example, the favorite enemy ability of rangers in 5th edition is kind of underwhelming because it has no impact on their ability to fight their favorite enemies. And I was expecting their alternate version to be in here, which I think lets them add a bonus. I can't remember if it was like a d6 against their favorite enemies, or if it was just a flat bonus of like +2 or +4 or whatever. But that's not in here. There's just some more archetypes, which are okay, my favorite of which being the Monster Slayer, which has, you know, bonuses or things that they can do against things like vampires, dragons, evil fae, fiends, and other magical threats, which I kind of like that one a fair amount. But again, I was kind of surprised that they didn't actually have the alternate ranger that they had in their Unearthed Arcana articles for a while now. I'm really surprised that that wasn't in there. Alright, so we're just going to flip through again. Like I said, I'm not going to go into detail on a lot of these. For rogues, I like the Swashbuckler, for example. For sorcerers, I do like that they have, for the sorcerer's bloodlines, or origins, they have the Divine Soul, which just basically gives you the ability to choose divine spells like cleric spells on top of sorcery spells or sorcerer spells. And based off your alignment, you can automatically gain a free spell, which I think is actually kind of cool. It kind of fits the idea of the Divine Soul from... or not the Divine Soul, but I can't remember the name of it now. But there was a character class in 3rd edition that, maybe it was Divine Soul, that let you cast divine spells, cleric spells spontaneously. Or Favorite Soul, that was the name of it. So the Divine Soul kind of works along those lines. It gives you some healing stuff, which is great. So again, it's just kind of a cool option if you wanted to have play a sorcerer but also have some healing abilities as well. I also like the shadow magic, mainly because in the Forgotten Realms, the goddess Shar created the Shadow Weave, and her machinations were always sort of a background thread in a lot of major stories that took place in the Forgotten Realms. And having the shadow magic thing, you can kind of play a character that draws inspiration from that, and I like that quite a bit. For Warlocks, the Hexblade was probably the one that I thought was the most interesting. But again, you know, I don't really get a chance to play stuff like this, but of the two, they have the patrons being the Celestial or the Hexblade, so which is, I guess, just something from the Shadowfell. But I always liked the idea of the Hexblade. I always thought it was kind of cool, so I'm glad that they have that here now. And of course, there's some new invocations. And then the last one is the Wizard. The Wizard only has one new option, but the option that they have, I actually kind of like. That's the War Mage. So you get like War Magic. And War Magic, it's instead of just being like evocation focused, it gives you some defensive options as well. So one of the things that I actually like is the Arcane Deflection ability. So if you are hit by an attack or you have to make a saving throw, you can use your reaction to gain a +2 bonus to your AC or a +4 bonus to the saving throw. The downside is that if you do that, you can't cast spells other than cantrips until the end of your next turn. But it's still something that, you know, you get sort of a defensive bonus, and that can kind of like save the life of, you know, a wizard. So I like the War Magic thing quite a bit. Another option, or another section that I actually really like here, is just the idea of fleshing out your origin, your backstory. And this section gives you a whole bunch of charts that just kind of explain your parentage, your upbringing. For example, you know, your parents. For example, you can roll here. You know who your parents are, or you don't. So it could be a mystery. If you're one of the half races, you know, you can determine what the makeup of your parents were. For example, half-orc, one parent was an orc, the other was a human. One parent was an orc, the other was a half-orc. One parent was human, the other was a half-orc, or both were half-orcs. So you can kind of determine randomly, if you want to flesh out that much of your background, what your parents were, which I think is, again, pretty cool. It also does the same, like where you were born. Your siblings, how many siblings do you have? What order were you born into your siblings? So if you have a brother or a sister, for example, are you older than them? Are you younger than them? Or were you born as twins? So it's just some cool ideas that you have, including just your family, again, your family makeup, which I'm not going to read all of them, but there's like your family, were your parents involved in your life, what your family lifestyle was, what your childhood home was like. And then there's the personal decisions section, which gives you reasons why you would have become the background and class that you've chosen. So, for example, again, I'm not going to read all of them, but these are, you can roll these randomly or you can choose. So let's just say you have the Acolyte background. You know, why did you choose the Acolyte background? So you could have, for example, you ran away from home at an early age and found refuge in a temple. If you're a criminal, maybe you're a criminal because necessity forced you to take up that life since it was the only way you could survive. So they're just ways of explaining why you have that background. And the same can be said for your class. So let's just say you are a fighter. You know, you could have become a fighter because so horrible monsters descended on my community, killing someone that I loved. I took up arms to destroy those creatures and others of similar nature. So you can kind of just, again, flesh out your backstory using these charts. And that's something that I think is kind of cool because not everybody's great at generating their backstories. And this allows you to go into a little bit more detail than you may necessarily do on your own, which I like. Again, there's also like life events that you can roll. You can roll what your current age is and how many life events you would roll based off your current age if you want to do that, again, randomly. And the life events are just some standard things. There's also like supernatural events, adventures, you know, tragedies. There's just a lot of really cool information here that I like quite a bit. And then we get into our racial feats. So the racial feats are just feats that you can have based off of your race. So there are new options that you can have. For example, if you're a drow, you may take drow high magic. So you can learn levitate and dispel magic. And you can cast those each once per day without having to expend spell slots. So again, just it's a new set of options that are great for your race and, you know, background information, stuff like that, which is really cool. Now, for me personally, what I was looking the most forward to is the Dungeon Master's tools. This is the main reason that I wanted this book because, let's face it, I always DM, so I rarely get a chance to actually play a player character. In fact, the last time I actually played as a player was several years ago when a buddy of mine was running a first edition AD&D game. And that was back in 2012. So it's been 5 years since I've actually had a chance to play as a player, just for an example. But again, some interesting new rules. You've got sleeping in armor, for example, for those who want to do that. If you have a character that wants to sleep in their medium armor, it now gives you the ramifications of doing so. For example, you only regain 1/4 of your possible hit dice, and you don't reduce exhaustion. And if you choose not to go through any rest, then there's rules for that as well. And some stuff for adamantine weapons, which I don't think was in the Dungeon Master's Guide. Now, the best part of this entire section, in my opinion, are the tool proficiencies. So tools were introduced in 5th edition, and for the most part, they were kind of undefined. You know, you had brewers, you had like brewer supplies, alchemist kits, you had thieves' tools, but for the most part, you weren't really sure what they really did, and the description wasn't the most thorough that it really could have been. What I like about this is, if you have tool proficiencies now, you can gain advantage on certain skill checks because, you know, they may interact with the tool proficiency that you have. So let's go to one of the more common ones that you may want. So for example, a rogue having thieves' tools. So for example, a thief or someone that's proficient with thieves' tools, it gives you, first of all, what the components are, so you know exactly what's in each of the kits, which is great. But let's just say you had certain skill checks that you wanted to make and you're proficient with the tools, so they now interact. So you can, for example, gain advantage on a history check. It says your knowledge of traps grants you insight when answering questions about locations that are renowned for their traps. So going through the Tomb of Horrors, for example, well, somebody with proficiency in thieves' tools might know a thing or two about that dungeon based off the fact that there's famous traps in there. Investigation and perception. You gain additional insight when looking for traps because you have learned a variety of common signs that betray their presence. So being proficient in thieves' tools makes it easier for you to find traps, which is awesome. It makes these tools something that you actually want to do more with, other than like, how do I use these? Now it gives you like things that you can actually do with them that, again, just makes them a more important part of the game, which is something that I felt that they were lacking in the base rule sets. The next section just talks about using magic and stuff on a grid. So just some idea of creating templates for cones, spheres, lines, things of that nature. And then we have encounter building. So I recently did a video explaining how to use the Dungeon Master's Guide rules for creating encounters step by step. And this provides a different way of going about that. So instead of using XP thresholds and multipliers for different monsters, the base thing, I haven't had a lot of time to sit down and read this, but the base idea is that you take how many player characters are in the party, what their levels are, and how many monsters each player is sort of the equivalent to. So basically, let's just say you've got some first level characters. So one first level character should be able to take on 2 challenge rating 1/8 creatures. One first level character should be able to take on 1 challenge rating 1/4 creature. For every 3 characters of first level in a party, they should be a suitable fit for 1 challenge rating 1/2 creature. And if you have 5 first level characters in your party, then understandably they should be able to take on 1 challenge rating 1 creature. So if you're looking to create an encounter, you've got 4 first level characters in the group, then you could conceivably have 8 challenge rating 1/8 creatures attack them, and it be a suitable encounter. So that's the sort of the basics of it. I'm not going to go into much more information than that because, again, I haven't had a chance to really sit down and read through it to try to compare the two and see which I like more. So an idea for a video that I want to do in the next week or so would be comparing the encounter creation rules from this book versus the Dungeon Master's Guide. But it also includes a bunch of encounter charts for different level ranges. So these are based off of the tiers of play. So you got tier 1 is levels 1 through 4, tier 2 is 5 through 10, tier 3 is 11 through 16, and tier 4 is 17 through 20. So for all the different environmental regions you can think of, it gives you random encounter charts for those different tiers of play, the different level ranges, which is great. So this is, again, a very, very, very useful section as well. It's something that I genuinely like, and I'm glad that it's in here. So, but it is just a bunch of charts, so we'll kind of skip past that. Up next is just information on traps, designing traps, like new types of traps, and kind of breaking them down into simple and complex traps with some examples of each. Now, I don't use a ton of traps for the most part, so this is something that I'm probably going to kind of flip through. But it is useful information if you want to incorporate more traps into your adventures. I'm okay with just the ones that are in the Dungeon Master's Guide personally, but this may give me some ideas on some new and interesting ways that I can incorporate traps later on. Another section that it goes into is just downtime, and it goes into a bit more detail with downtime activities and things that you can do. It also introduces the idea of rivals, and I kind of like the idea of having rivals for downtime activity, just someone that can kind of antagonize the player characters. I think that's actually kind of cool. Now, when you go through and you do the downtime activities that are already presented in like the Player's Handbook and the Dungeon Master's Guide, you've got a new thing that it kind of introduces in the line of complications. Now, some of these complications might involve a rival. So if you're trying to purchase a magic item, you could have something where the party's enemy spreads rumors that the item is an artifact of evil. So it may make it difficult for the player characters to actually acquire that item. And it's, again, just something that, you can use with rivals that just makes the campaign world feel a little bit more fleshed out. So I like that quite a bit. And it just goes into some more specifics on what you can do with each of the downtime activities. Again, I'm not going to go through all of them, but there's things like, gambling. It goes into more gambling, or pit fighting if you have someone that wants to earn some money fighting, in like gladiator games or stuff like that. Then you can do that. So that's, again, kind of interesting, as well as selling magic items, which is probably some useful information as well. Now, another part of this book that I absolutely adore is it introduces some new magic items, and these are common magic items. So, unlike the magic items in the Dungeon Master's Guide, which had a lot of minor items, and then you had a lot of like uncommon, rare, and even I think a few legendary items. This really expands your amount of common magic items, which are magic items that you may encounter more frequently, but they don't necessarily overpower the game or change things. For example, I love the Armor of Gleaming, which is just this armor never gets dirty. It can be any armor, and I had a player in some of my games who would always have some sort of enchantment placed on his armor to make it so that he never got dirty, and it was just part of his character's his background, the way that he played the character. Whoops. So something like this would be just great for him to have. I also like the Hat of Wizardry. For anybody who watched the old Dungeons & Dragons animated series from back in the 80s, you may remember Presto with his magical hat. And so this is, you can use it as your spellcasting focus, so you kind of take the hat off and you can channel energy through it. But one of the things that I think is kind of cool is that you can try to cast a cantrip that you don't know. The cantrip must be on the wizard spell list, and you must make a DC 10 Intelligence Arcana check. If the check succeeds, you cast the spell. If it fails, so does the spell, and the action used to cast the spell is wasted. In either case, you can't use this property again until you finish a long rest. So it just gives a little bit of extra options for your character, but it's not going to overbalance the game. Like, you can only do it basically once per day. So being able to cast a cantrip beyond the ones that you already know once per day is going to be something that's kind of cool. And again, it can potentially backfire and fail. But it's something that's kind of cool. I like the idea of it, and it doesn't, blow the game out of proportion in terms of like what the characters can do now based off of these items. Another great thing that this book has is a table of all the magic items in the Dungeon Master's Guide, and I believe this one as well, based off of their rarity. So you got minor items and major items, but you've got based off their like common, uncommon, rare, very rare, or I think legendary is the last one. So, or legendary, yeah. So what's great about this is really useful if you're running a home game and you've got new players coming in or new characters coming in, because depending on the level of the character, you're going to have some magic items, and you get a certain number of magic items based off of their rarity. And this chart just helps a lot with that, and it really makes that process a whole lot easier. And as a DM, if I want to hand out some like major or minor items based off of rarity, instead of rolling randomly, I can just look at these charts and decide which one I want to use. So I like that quite a bit. And then the next few sections are just spells. Some new spells that are added to the game, including things like Mass Polymorph, Psychic Scream, Dance Macabre. That just seems like an interesting one. Just some new spells to add to your game. I'm not going to read them out in detail, but new options are always useful to have, so that's great. And then we got just our last two things are our appendix. So Appendix A and Appendix B. Appendix A is for shared campaigns. The idea behind a shared campaign is that you have multiple dungeon masters running games for the same group of characters. The easiest example of shared campaigns would be D&D Adventurers League, where you have multiple DMs that you could take your characters to. But if you're doing this as a home game, there's just some outlines as well for that, including character creation and character advancement. They have some new rules for that as well. So I'm not too, for me, I like the idea of just using milestones. So when the players achieve a certain point in the story, I just kind of give them a level. But this one has things like checkpoints, which you can use. I like the milestone version better, so I probably won't use that in here. And then just some guidelines on magic items, gaining and selling them, and so on and so forth. And then the last section here is just a whole bunch of character names. And this is great for me in particular because I am awful with names, and coming up with names is something that I've always struggled with, especially for fantasy RPGs. So I love this section of the book immensely. And another great thing is that the human names are actually broken down by like ethnicity types. So you've got like Arabic, Egyptian, Chinese, French, English, German. So you can just choose a whole bunch of different names based off of what you want your character's sort of ethnicity to be. And that's, again, something that's really cool because I'm horrible with all these types of names. So if you want like Japanese names, then you can do that. Mesoamerican, Norse, Slavic, Roman. So there's just a lot of names in here, and that's, to me, that's absolutely fantastic because you can use that to flesh out your NPCs or just for your characters themselves. So those are the contents of the book. Overall, how do I feel about Xanathar's Guide to Everything? I'm going to be honest, I love this book, and it's probably, in my opinion, the best of the 3 supplements to come out so far, being Xanathar's Guide to Everything, Volo's Guide to Monsters, and Sword Coast Adventurer's Guide. That said, a lot of the new player character options in terms of the new class features, like the archetypes, paths, things along those lines, I wasn't really blown away by a lot of them. But that's, again, for me, that was a part of the book that I wasn't really interested in to begin with because I haven't actually played as a player character in years and years and years, and the last time I played a player character, 5th edition hadn't existed yet. So for me, I'm not so worried by the fact that I wasn't interested in those. Now, again, if you're a player and you're looking for new options for your character, then this book has a ton of them, and you're going to find something, I would assume, between the Player's Handbook and this book, you're going to find something that you're going to want to play. And that's fantastic from that perspective. For me, the things that I like the most about this book are the expanded descriptions on what you can do with tool proficiencies. I love that. I liked the racial feats. I liked that quite a bit, actually. As well as just the expanded background information for fleshing out your character's backstory. I thought that was something that was really cool. Overall, this is an excellent book. Even if I was sort of, again, not blown away by a lot of the things that were in there for the player characters, I still think that this is an amazing book, and if you are looking to expand your options for 5th edition Dungeons & Dragons, and you want something beyond just the Player's Handbook, and you only want to buy one supplement, this is the supplement to get. This, in my opinion, is one of the better expansions for the 5th edition Dungeons & Dragons game. As far as the downsides of it go, again, I'm surprised that there were no new backgrounds to have in this book. I thought that was something that would at least have a few new options, so I was kind of surprised that that wasn't in there. I'm surprised that they didn't have the alternate ranger, which was a big part of the Unearthed Arcana playtest materials that was released a while back. So I was surprised that they didn't have any of that in there. But other than that, I'm pretty happy with everything else that's in this book. I love the list of names. To me, that's one of the most useful things that I'm going to get out of this book. So I love that that's in here. And again, just all the DM's tool stuff was fantastic in my opinion. So this is a great book. If you're looking to, again, expand your collection of D&D 5th edition materials, this is a fantastic book to get, and I can't recommend it enough. So overall, I definitely approve of this, and there's probably going to be something in here for everyone, which is great. So if you haven't had the chance to pick it up yet, again, I highly recommend it. And if you're only looking to get one extra book for D&D 5th edition of everything that's been put out so far, this is the one that I recommend. So let me know what you guys think in the comments below. What's your favorite part of the book? Like, for example, if there's some of those subclasses, which ones of those do you really like? Let me know. I look forward to reading that. So thank you guys very much for watching. I hope you enjoyed, and we'll see you next time. Funding for this channel is provided by the awesome support of my patrons on my Patreon page, and I'd like to provide a special thanks to Kennedy S. and David L. You guys really help make this possible for me to continue making these kinds of videos. So thank you to everyone who contributes. You guys are all awesome, and special thanks to David L. and Kennedy S. You guys rock.